My name is Sam Nicoletti, and I see murders before they happen. A little voice tells me the killer's name and address. And if I stop them, I save a life. If I ignore them, an innocent human dies. What would you do in my situation?
Psychic Sam is a classic boys comic. It's about a guy with a big gun who goes out and solves problems, and he hears voices in his head tell him to kill bad guys. The only trouble is the bad guys haven't done anything yet, but every time he ignores it, someone innocent dies, and it's only a matter of time before the bodies start piling up.
I'm working with a guy named Mark Millar. Mark and I started on Wolverine together, and we got to create Kick-Ass, and we had a brilliant time. It changed our lives. So now we come up with a third collaboration, and it's called Psychic Sam, and I have the legend Klaus Janson working with me, and then the brilliant Bill Crabtree doing the color art. And we are having an all-out blast with this.
The big news is we're also doing a movie of Psychic Sam. There's a guy called Ivan Atkinson who's brilliant. He's Guy Ritchie's producer, and he's produced some of my favourite films from Guy. Wrath of Man, The Gentleman, all these amazing films Guy's been doing over the last few years.
Ivan Atkinson, yeah. I'm excited to be teaming up with Mark Millar and his exciting new project, Psychic Sam. Mark and I have been talking about working together for a number of years, and I found the project that I think brings fascinating characters and action together, reminding me of the films I grew up loving.
This is completely outside of Millar World and Netflix and all the stuff I've been doing for the last 20 years, really. None of those books will be affected, and all our new titles will still be out there every month. I just carved out a wee holiday for myself and thought about doing something for maybe Marvel or DC again. Then I thought, wouldn't it be great to do some creator-owned with Johnny Romita Jr.?
There's so many great tiers to this, so many great levels to this. We're gonna do a black and white version with a painted cover.
Done in the style of a 1970s Marvel magazine, beautifully packaged in that big magazine-size format. There's hardcovers, there's t-shirts, there's trading cards, there's stickers.
Spectacular stuff. You can also get written and drawn into the issues, which would be a lot of fun. I have to do justice to all of you.
We're assembling a fantastic team of filmmakers on this production, and we will have some more information for you guys soon.
We just are having so much fun with the character. It's probably as good as it gets, but the fact that it's the third time with Mark, it's a charm.
I think there's something special brewing here, so don't miss it. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well,
We've spoken
man.
over
By
email
the way,
quite a lot, but
I appreciate you, even asking for me to be on, man. I appreciate that big time.
Well, do you know what's funny? Normally, because you're unusual, normally what I do is so many people have got in touch with me and said, hey, listen, I've got 5 years worth of work I'd love to talk about. And I was like, 5 years isn't enough. If I'm doing 2 hours, I need to talk to a guy who's been doing it for 20 years or something.
Right.
But you're kind of a special case. I think, like, you're an interesting guy, and you've kind of exploded onto the scene relatively recently, and your story's unlike anybody else's and your results are unlike anybody else's. So, we've never actually met. We've talked a lot over email and DMs and things like that, but I'm kind of fascinated by what you've done. I love it, I love to see success in comics, and you brought success to comics, which is great.
Thank you. Appreciate that big time. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I don't get oftentimes. I'm always talking so much about people want me to talk business and all the other things, and I'm all for it, the stories and everything. I'm all for it, but to be able to spend time with a great and just really put that into context, man, that I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, my plan here is to do maybe 50, 60 interviews. I'm not sure, because I don't plan to do it forever. I see it almost like, a time capsule. And just all the kind of creators who I think are interesting, just have a little thing that always exists out there on YouTube. And in 30 years' time, people can say, I wonder what that guy was like, and go back and chat. And I think you're one of those guys. I think it's, it'll be a good hour, I think. It's
most definitely, man. Yeah, it is a kind of unique scenario. So hopefully people can get something out of it, man. Big time.
But the timing was interesting, I think, when you appeared as well, because when I was growing up, everybody wanted into comics because it was a boom time, right? So I was growing up in the 80s, and everybody was like, this is amazing. And everybody at school's reading comics, and Frank Miller's doing Dark Knight, and it's in all the magazines and everything, and it was cool, And you came along at the worst possible time, I think probably in the industry's history, like the early 2020s. Things have started to uptick a little bit maybe just now. But catastrophic where even like lifelong readers like myself are hardly reading anything, And you had a career outside of this and all that. Like, what the hell attracted you into something that looked like it was on its knees?
Yeah, it was for sure very interesting because obviously I got in, to your point, when it was a lot of, just everybody from veterans to customers to everybody just kind of felt a little grim about where the industry was heading. And for me, it was actually, that was a source of my influence, right? Like for me, looking at where it was and even looking at how I felt from the customer's perspective, people that had watched me on YouTube, heard my gripes and complaints, it wasn't always about the content. It was also just about like the general structure of how comics hadn't really got up with the times as far as its business model and everything. So my whole thing was to try to implement some sort of market correction that was my view of it, right? Yeah. And I knew that it wasn't going to necessarily be for everybody, but my point was that it didn't really, for me, need to be. It just needed to work, right? I needed to have these updated models, which is why the Rippaverse, one of the core things that I wanted to emphasize when I started the company was having a mix of the newer talent, kind of wet behind the ears like myself, while also mixing in the guys that have been around the block. So even like the first book that we did, Cliff Richards is a veteran in the industry. Gabe, the colorist, is a veteran in the industry. And then obviously moving from to Chuck Dixon and some of the other greats as well. So we had that mix of talent. So you had those people that were given that perspective, right, of, well, this is how we did it back then, and this is what we know that works. And then you had the other guys that were like, well, why don't we try this and why don't we try that? And this is why I believe that Rippaverse is just a perfect storm of and why it worked. And the timing actually was a big reason as to why it blew up the way that it did in the mid 2022.
So tell me, like the year before you did it, the year before we heard of it, what was going on in your life, and did you talk to your wife about this? And like, did you say, right, it's time for a change? Where were you as a person before this then?
Yeah, I did a lot. It's a fantastic question, by the way, that I don't get to answer much because, like, I was at this odd state where I had did a lot of like just general content creation and commentary at the time. Yeah. So not just talking about comics, we were talking about what was going on in just a general political kind of landscape, because a lot of people know me from like all that type of talk. And we were talking about how things were, and I just, that creative itch, it was not being scratched for me really at all. And I came first from writing, like doing a lot of music, ghostwriting, as well as doing my own and my bands that I had that were successful. And during that period of time, we weren't really doing any of that either. So again, I think that was also part of the perfect storm where I was like, look, I'm doing a lot of talking about everybody else's work and I'm not doing a lot of working, right? I'm not doing a lot of creative stuff. So for me, it was like, why don't I give this a try? And I did have that long talk with my wife, who, she supports me in everything that I do. And even then, though, it was a conversation more like, this almost seems like a passion project. To your point, comics had been kind of more or less, at least in the West, on that decline. So it was a very risky thing. And I invested my own money into it, like $200,000 on my money. Yeah, you got to explain that, right? to your significant other. Like, I'm going to be dipping into our money. I really believe in this project, and I really believe that we can do something with it. Yeah. But even then, there's still a lot of uncertainty. And it was, I tried to make it as calculated as possible, informed as possible. I needed to be as informed as I realistically possibly could about the industry, the medium, all the economics of it all, making sure my ducks were in a row for it to work. But I had that big support base with my wife. And it's funny looking back at it in retrospect, like, we're going to sell maybe a couple of comics, even if I get it to 1,000, I'm like, this is a massive success. And then but we'll fulfill those comics out of the house, right? We'll set it up over here. We got all this space. And then that went from having to account for the purchases of over 40,000 customers, right? And it was like, oh, snaps. And I had to get this warehouse and all that. And she was so very supportive of me through that entire process because it was a massive learning curve. And it would have been very difficult for me to accomplish that without her support. But yeah, it was a lot of work that went into it. And she was with me beside me the entire time.
So what was your research? What were you doing, before you picked up a pen and started writing? Like, did you look at 80 years of comics? Did you look at the last 10 years of comics? What were you thinking?
Well, both. Economically, I would say I was looking more at the last 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. But as far as my approach, because obviously I was the first writer because of ISOM was a project that I had written. And though it wasn't the first project, the first comic book that I was putting out under my own name. Yeah. So there was a lot of research about the medium that I had did, studying obviously you had, Stan Lee and the sort of the Marvel method and approaching it that way as far as just general storytelling, but also with Denny O'Neil. He wrote some great works with DC on how to write comics. So I'm studying the medium from the creative perspective, because both of those perspectives are obviously pretty different, right? The Marvel method is a little more loose, right? Where Denny O'Neil, his approach is more kind of where I lean towards, and where, you give the artist that room for interpretation, but you're pretty descriptive in how you're approaching it, just writing a script. So I learned a lot about the medium and the creative aspects of it all before I put pen to pad, and I was building out my universe there. But as far as a lot of the economics of it all, that took me studying really much of what was going on during that period of time. Mm-hmm. But also, some of the future as well, like the distribution methods and everything. And I did a lot of stuff that was unorthodox. It wasn't necessarily new. Obviously, you can kind of feel me on some of this with some of the approaches you had with the creator-owned stuff and doing, Millar World and everything. But for me, there's some economic problems in comics. Why am I always seeing artists having these gripes, writers having these gripes with pay and all these other things? Like, what's going on with the distribution and why are there complaints maybe happening from the stores? And I was studying all of that. And I kind of, I don't want to say stumbled upon, it was more the decision that I made was that, okay, I'm going to take what I think works and try to implement that in my model. But I'm also going to do the risky thing, especially with that volume, controlling my own distribution. So in forming the Rippaverse, it wasn't just building that creative team. A lot of the logistical side had to be taken care of. And there was a lot of studying that I had to do there as well, because I'm not just running like a studio or art house. No, this is, okay, well, how am I going to get product in? How am I going to get product out? What is going to be the infrastructure surrounding all of that? So I was studying pretty much, again, where the industry was going and where I wanted us to be economically. And that's where I kind of came up on, okay, we're going to do it this way. And sure, it is unorthodox. It is very driven by direct to consumer, which you don't really see that in like the mainstream, even the main indies now. And it worked. It just really, it worked, but it took a lot of research and also a lot of trial and error, because when you do something like that, not everything's going to work. The Rippaverse today doesn't look like it did day one of the launch, especially with how we approach distribution. It was a lot of adjustments that we had to make, and you have to, as a business owner, be open to that sort of wiggle room as you're figuring it out along the way.
See, I hadn't appreciated that you had been a commentator prior to this, because I sort of discovered you backwards, like it was, all the comic guys were like, have you seen this guy? This is amazing what this guy's doing, So ISOM issue 1 was kind of the beginning for me of you, So then, I'm finding out this stuff backwards that had you built up an audience really then through your commentary that you brought with it? Yeah,
it was a combination of the commentary as well as the other creative endeavors that I had. So a lot of people, that found out about me either through the commentary or through the comic books didn't know that on the in the hip hop, more rap scene, I was doing that stuff since I was a teenager. But I really, really started to take off as a musician with the band still around, Fire from the Gods, another Billboard charting band, though I'm not with them anymore. Then I started my own band in Backwards in 2014-ish. That became a Billboard charting band. We had the #2 Heat Seeker album. So my first kind of big exposure to an audience was through music. It was either through my original creative stuff, or it was either through the like vocal covers that I used to do on my channel, where I'm doing all these metal covers and whatnot. And that was my first big exposure, especially online, to like a different audience. And then from that audience, a lot of people, some crossed over into the more commentary stuff. Not all of them, obviously, but I also think that worked to my benefit, because by the time I had started the Rippaverse, you had people from pretty much all walks of life that had become fans of me. People that knew me for the hip hop stuff, people that knew me for the metal and hardcore stuff, people that knew me for more of the political commentary, or people that knew me from just a general like nerd culture commentary, be it like comics and games and things of that nature. So all these people knew that I had at least a track record of delivering on my promises. Not to say that it was ever going to be the best thing that that people listened to or viewed, but they knew that I was going to try my absolute hardest to make the best thing, whatever that was that it could be. So that audience that got built, you had a lot of people take risk with ISOM, number one. And I think that was part of that, again, perfect storm. You had all these people that were rooting for me from all different walks of life. People that were never into comics were buying ISOM number one. And now we've got to the point to where people are starting to gravitate towards their taste, right? Maybe ISOM isn't up to their speed. They like more Chuck Dixon's Horsemen or Blood Ruth and the Saskas doing their little horror stories and everything like that. But so many people were willing to give it a shot. And I think it's because of just all the things that I was dipped into at the time.
See, I never actually thought about it till now, but I wonder, you must see the statistics on this, but people who've never read a comic before, it sounds like you had a lot of new people coming in who didn't pick up books, you know? So you're carving out this new thing.
Yeah, that was, and that was a very important thing as well, because I'm looking at where the industry is going and how people are gravitating towards like different forms of entertainment. Even in the comic book space, we know that here in the West that, Japanese entertainment has just absolutely exploded. Manga has exploded. So I'm looking at it from that perspective, and that really what we need in this day and age is new readers. Simply put, we need new readers, young readers, guys that are, older. It doesn't matter. It needs new readers. And that was an important thing for me to emphasize. I know how comics meant so much to me growing up. But in the same respects, we need, if this is going to last, you need people that have never read a book before becoming fans. And that benefits the genre, that benefits the whole ecosystem, because maybe, that introduction is in like maybe Yaira or ISOM or whatever the book may be, but who's to say that person won't also go down the rabbit hole that is comics and start reading other people's books as well. You just created a new fan. So I think this is why I'm so very supportive of a lot of these new guys trying new things. And I know some people look at that more as like they knock that. It's like, well, people that aren't lifetime or, comic book lifers aren't reading your books. And it's like, well, so what? Like, don't we need new readers? Does it really even matter that lifers are the only people that are reading this versus not? No, I think we need a mix of both. And that's going to require newbies to get into the medium. And that was so very important for me to appeal to those types and create new fans just as much as having something there for the people that were comic book lifers like myself.
But you'll have noticed historically, that comics if you look at it as an 85-year thing, typically there was a great 10 years, a sort of boom 10 years, and then a sort of slump 10 years. So the 40s were huge, the 50s were bad, the 60s were huge, the 70s were bad, 80s huge. By 94, things are collapsing, And then in the year 2000, the Joe Quesada years at Marvel, boom again before this inevitable bust. So I think sometimes your career can be just lucky from the decade you were born. I was really lucky. I grew up in the 80s when everybody's reading comics. And then I got to work in it in the 2000s when everybody's buying comics, so it was great. I missed those kind of bad decades, really, But every 20 years, there tends to be a new wave of people getting into it. It seems to kind of be reborn every 20 years, usually with a new bunch of pros and everything as well. What do you think happens over the last few years where those new people didn't come in? What do you think went wrong?
Oh, man, it's so much to that, because I think that it just I think a lot of people forgot exactly why we're doing this, and maybe that's just because comics had been around as a medium for as long as it had been, and everybody was used to the way things were. And I
Yeah.
think people just really didn't really understand that you always needed this new wave of
Mhm.
people that were getting into it, right?
Yeah.
And I think folks were trying to appeal to maybe too much. And then look, this is just what I pick up from it,
Mhm.
trying too hard to appeal to maybe their own peers as opposed to just general customers, people that, and this is what I'm always trying to emphasize to other creators, that
Yeah.
oftentimes, especially if you're in an entertainment medium, one of the first things that I had to learn with
Mhm.
music, as an example, is that the vast majority of the people that listen to my music aren't other musicians, right? And it's the same thing with comics for me.
Yeah.
And that, yes, people need to understand that the vast majority of people that read comics are not your fellow creators. And that's not to say that, they can't be involved in the process. It's that they view things through a completely different lens, right? And
Mhm.
so when you lose sight of that and what the general customer wants, and it's always updating, by the way, to your point, you have these booms and you have the bust, right? So it is on you, especially the business owners in comics, to try to gauge what may or may not appeal to the
Yeah.
market, because what maybe worked 10 years ago maybe doesn't work the next 10 years. And you always have to keep kind of your hand on the pulse, right? So I think just people just kind of really lost sight of that, and which is why that new wave seemed to not come. But also, and just to be completely transparent, I think a lot of people saw that with myself, and that unfortunately, and maybe you can speak to this as well, comics, at least as of recently, seems to have become very catty, right? At
Mhm.
least on the creator side, right?
Yeah.
It's just very catty, where it almost feels like when you're on to something and something starts to work, you get this influx of people that are just trying to kneecap
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
in what you're doing, even if it is good for the industry and that maybe it's not something that you're into. But on net, there are more people that are maybe getting into comics. Creators see that, and potential creators see that, and potential customers see that, right? And
Mhm.
I think this is why a lot of folks, I just did a video talking about this, and why I think that a lot of the young people are more so influenced, especially on the art side, more influenced by what's happening in Japan
Mhm.
versus what's happening out here.
Yeah.
Okay. I see a lot of that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the creator culture. It's not only the creator culture. Obviously, there's other things that can speak to that, but it's the creator culture as well. And if people are seeing that you're giving a hard time, this isn't even about me. And now you can maybe argue that maybe I was a part of the problem when I did some of the commentary stuff. But what incentive does a new creator, maybe with some great ideas
Mhm.
that could help the industry, what incentive do they have to enter into if they think they're going to get bombed by the time that they start to kind of gain some sort of ground, right? They're like, I don't want any part of that. I've seen it myself, even with our own fan art contest, as an example, where there's so much just nonsensical, catty things happening around it. And they're like, I didn't sign up for that. I just wanted to have fun. I just wanted to
Yeah.
be a creator. I didn't sign up to be bombarded with all of that. And yeah, that has a way of impacting the industry. So it's just not very welcoming, maybe in comparisons to decades in the past. And maybe social media has a lot to it. I don't
Mhm.
really know the specific answer to it. But because it's not as welcoming, I think all of that trickles down, and why customers are just like, I don't know if I want to get into this, and creators as well.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, because my experience of comics, growing up, you met another comic guy, and it was quite exciting. If there's a guy in your
Yeah.
class at school who's into comics, you're like, okay, well, you're my new best friend,
Yeah.
you're swapping comics and you're talking about it and everything, and you're trying to get other guys into it and everything. So weirdly, in real life, see, when these guys meet each other, they actually get on really well, don't they? There's
Yeah.
something about that anonymity of online, and it's not like
Mm-hmm.
real people suddenly. It's like the Stanford experiment or something. Like they actually
Yeah.
torture each other. But
Yeah.
in reality, when they meet up, they actually get on great. So I mean, what I always say to young creators, especially, is just hit the block button. If somebody's crazy,
Yeah.
just hit the block button.
Absolutely.
don't engage. Just move on and just hang out with the guys you like.
Bingo. That's the way to approach it. And you bring up a fantastic point. When we go to cons and when I like my experience for the most part for this ventures, even for guys that have been around the block, for the most part, has been nothing but positive things, right? I've gone to the cons and even people that I wouldn't think that would be the biggest fans of me will pull me aside like, hey, man, I love what you're doing. This is great. Fans we're meeting up with, people that have maybe have not had a chance. We put those videos out because we want people to see a lot of that stuff online isn't real, right? It's just not real, or it's maybe a skewed vision. But the problem is that as we progress, and if you didn't grow up in that day and age where social media didn't dominate, right? These younger folks, that's where they live, right? Online, like it's been introduced to them since they were young. They grew up in the social media age. So it has a way of them thinking that is real. And I do believe it's on us to kind of explain that to them, that there is a lot of noise, but it's not like, trust me, definitely when you get out there in the real world and you're interacting with people, it's not nearly as bad as what it may seem. But if that's all that you're around, if you log into anything online and that's all that, it has a way of like kind of warping your perspective on things. And that's the dangers of social media. It can be a beautiful thing. I met up with a lot of awesome people due to it, but you have to know how to analyze it and navigate it for sure.
Yeah. But it's funny, success also brings a certain amount of criticism, doesn't it? So, when things go well, it's great, but the one downside of it is that you do have people with the knives out. It does, people get a little crazy. And you see it, like with me and some of my peers, it's suddenly you've got a bunch of Hollywood's deals and everything, and people get a little funny. But with you, it was like, the fact you come out the gate so strong. I can't remember what that first campaign did, but was it like $3 million, $4 million?
Yeah, $3.7 million. Yeah.
I love that you remember as well, because it's a big deal. It's a big deal, historically in the industry, guys got no money, there was periods where great creators had nothing, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, so I love it. I celebrate it when I see guys doing well. I remember somebody bitching when I was in my early 20s that Rob Liefeld made $20 million one year. It was like 1993, 94. He made $20 million. And I was like, why are you bitching? Like,
exactly.
That's inspirational, be like Rob, this is cool. So I loved what you did and the fact that it hit big, but did you have any inkling this was coming? What was your dream figure you had in your head when you put that campaign up?
My idea was that, if I had sold even any six figures, I even thought was like an uphill battle. I maybe set that as a goal, but I was like, look, man, if it does half of that, look, realistically, we could see that as a success with the guy's first book. First, it's the company is just launching, right? I'd have been like, I would have been still on the moon. Yeah. I had no idea that it was going to blow up the way that it did. I thought we would see some success, but I'd be lying to you if I thought even $1 million was going to be something that was going to be extremely realistic. And then to do that three times that is even more like what just happened.
So tell me,
it's still kind of surreal.
When you switched on your phone, when it goes live and everything, when did things start to get crazy?
So it got crazy pretty early on. We hit, I believe, at the 30-hour mark, we hit $1 million, if I'm not mistaken. So it was give or take a day is when it got there. And I was like, are you serious? I'm having site issues that I didn't think we were going to have. A server capacity was just out of control. People couldn't log. It was nuts. And I'm scrambling because, the old saying is more money, more problems. Yeah. I'm trying to, it wasn't that much time to celebrate because I'm like, well, I also have to get the logistics in order because of when I went from thinking, okay, if I did a couple of thousand books or whatever, that would have been a great time to having to account for several, literally tens of thousands of books. And I'm like, well, how are we going to deliver that? How are we going to, that's what's all going through my mind. And thankfully, I had a great support group of people that I had part-time guys that I moved to full-time. And I had a bunch of guys that I reached out to help out. Brandon, for example, he's the best man in my wedding. one of the groomsmen in my wedding. And I had him, I reached out like, hey, man, I know you're working this awesome job, but what do you think about handling operations for me? And he was like, I'll do it. Like, he's a friend that believed in me. He said, I'll do it. He still, to this day, continues to run the warehouse there. But, yeah, it was a lot of scrambling there. And, yeah, like, just to go back on the previous point, there were a lot of guys that were in the game that were celebrating me. People that, again, I never spoke to before. And they still to this day will message me and say, well, we appreciate that. And that's awesome what you're doing. And it is more celebratory. And sure, yeah, you have those guys that looked at that because, oh, this is the new kid on the block. Why does he get access to $3 million? I've been doing this for 15 years. And so I got some of that. But by and large, it was positive reaction. And still to this day, by and large, it's more positive reaction, supportive. It's guys that have even come to us that are now working with us, like Chuck, who saw that and was like, oh, I'd be willing to get in on that. Mike Barron, those guys. And that's awesome to see, right? Because now I'm even right now talking to people whose books I grew up on, right? Because I am a relatively young fellow. I'm only 35 years old. So, my first introduction, for example, was Flash. That was my mother introducing me to Flash. In the 90s, right? It was Mark Wade's Flash, which when he got off it, Mark, you were writing those.
I did a little run in my early 20s.
Yeah.
I did a little bit of a run. Yeah.
You were writing those books as well, which is kind of crazy how now all the books that I was reading, I'm getting to at least interact with these people who helped, kind of shape my perspective on just comics in general as a fan. So it's awesome. I'm blessed. I pray, and thank Jesus every single day for being in the position that I'm in, because I do know that it absolutely it is a blessing. That's the only way to explain.
My friends and I were all emailing, and everybody, all of my comic pals, were really behind you. They were loving it, and we were excited because we were seeing this thing climbing, and then we signed up for your newsletter, and we were keep in touch and everything. We thought, but that was a really exciting time. It's blown my mind that your earliest comics were the mid-90s, but I forget how young you are. You're only 35, which is great.
That was my introduction. Yeah, I'm a young guy, and I was very aware of that. That look, yes, I had written things before, but this was entering in kind of a new territory for me, and which is why I was trying to equip myself with the knowledge as best to my ability, reading as much material as I realistically could to just learn more about the medium, and also again surrounding myself with other professionals, and it just helped so much. I was really they set me up for success. And just me being open to that sort of stuff set the company up for success. And it just worked out. It just worked out. And again, I can't say enough how blessed I am.
Because reading old comics, reading current comics, reading old comics is like university if you're working in comics.
Yes.
It's important. But you know what I always found very useful as well for perspective, but also for information, is fanzines, like old fanzines, like a comics journal, one of those things, Amazing Heroes or something. Because you learn from the guys who did it 20, 30, 40 years before you, and like old guys have got a little bit of wisdom, So I used to glean every single 20, 30, 40 page interview in Comics Journal. I used to soak that stuff up, because that's when you learned about things like the comic book cycles, the fact that careers have a certain length of time, the trends have a certain length of time. Yes. You might be in a bust in 1975, but wait 10 years and suddenly books are selling 1 million copies again and everything, So it's useful. So did you dig into all that stuff as well? Did you just read everything?
Yeah.
Get your hands on it?
I mean, again, like one of the things that really stuck with me was in reading as an example, with the DC's approach to comics and that wonderful book that was written by Denny O'Neil. One of the things that he talks about is professionalism, right? And he talks about like other things that, sure, there are aspects of comics that are very important. And that is the creative side, understanding how to write, which he goes into, how to collaborate with other people, how your editors are really your first audience, and how, all that information, you're soaking that stuff in. But he talks about making sure, there's something as simple as like meeting your deadlines and doing things of that, and how much that will assist you in breaking out, right? Like in comics and just being generally a professional. So while, I was in a little bit of a different scenario because I'm the one that, I was writing it, but I'm also the one bankrolling this entire project, right?
Yeah.
So, ultimately I had the big say, right, on it. But there's still so much that can be said to that, and picking up on the knowledge that a lot of these guys had and how they approached it, and also the mistakes. The same goes for the mistakes, right? Like that seasoned veteran is going to be going through a lot of things and they're going to know what worked for them, and they're going to also know what didn't work for them,
Yes.
right? And they were allowed to, obviously bump their head as many times as they needed to before they got to the position that they got into. So yeah, it's important to pick up on that information, because I had to learn a lot about that, even with the creation of the Rippaverse, post-creation of Rippaverse. One of the things, going back to what Denny O'Neil was saying, professionalism was I would say, if I had an Achilles heel, that was it, right? Because I came from, obviously, the commentary, and also coming from genres that are really in your face, right? Like, hip hop and hardcore stuff. Like, it just doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't translate well into comics. It's that you may be hindering yourself, right? In being so aggressive in that approach. It's not to say that you can't have your own opinion. It's not to say that you should have people take advantage of you, but especially from the leadership perspective, maintaining that professionalism is so very, very important. So I made sure that I made an adjustment in just how even just my public persona was and what people were seeing. So it's not the same. I'm not like doing commentary in 2018. It's different, right? I'm not approaching it the same exact way that I did back then than I am now, because I had to become a better professional. That was something that, Den O'Neil, reading his works, kind of helped there. So it's also, you're always constantly learning. I think I'll be into my 50s and still be picking up on things as well. So being open to learn more, I think, is really, really crucial to your success. And reading up on the guys that were doing things before you is also very, 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 very important.
It's funny though you say that, because I think it was important you did what you did as well, not only to build an audience, but also there's a thing about being in your 20s where you should be mouthing off about things, and you should have a big opinion, and then as you get older, and especially once you're a parent and things like that, you slightly calm down a little bit, But it'd be weird if you were a middle-aged 25-year-old, wouldn't it? You had to be that guy, So.
That makes sense. That's a good way to put that. Rough around the edges, right? When I was in my 20s, I guess kind of looking at that in retrospect, you definitely with my band, right? A lot of that stubbornness even benefited me, because it's funny, Mark, there's a lot of crossover between the music industry and the comic book industry.
Hip hop especially is crazy.
Yeah. It's so much crossover, and a lot of what I've learned doing stuff independently, especially when we released our album. I was that first album, or that first when I first started backwards, I was 24, I think. So I was a really young guy, and I was like, I'm stubborn. I don't want to do it the way that everybody else is doing it. I'll maybe learn from them, but I want to do it our way, right? So we did that whole thing independently. The only thing that we got help with was with digital distribution, where we worked with Stay Sick. But everything else was owned by us. We did everything ourselves, and everybody at the time was telling me that was the worst idea to do it. The worst idea that I had, and it ended up being the best idea that I had. But you learn from that stuff, and now I'm just applying all of what I picked up when I was a lot more stubborn, and I'm trying to implement that within the company as well, because like I said, we're not just bringing in people that are well older than I am. I'm also bringing guys that are younger, right? I want to give those artists a chance and doing things like that. And that's a different person. You're dealing with a different kind of navigating that sort of relationship is very, very important. And the things that I learned along the way, I'm making sure that I apply that. And to even how I approach contracts, man, I make sure that, what were the mistakes that these young people were making back in the gap? Okay, I don't want to take advantage of these guys. I want the Rippaverse to feel like a place that you can work with, and that you're going to be taken care of. So, making sure that I'm implementing that is very, very important. So it's life experience as well. So while you're picking up on guys that have been around, I picked up a lot on some of the successes that I had when I was in my 20s, and also some of the things that maybe didn't go so well when I was in my 20s.
But I think never be ashamed of it, because I think it makes you a better boss if you were a crazy creative earlier. You know what I mean? Like, so I think imagine a polite hip hop guy, right? It's like the whole
right. Yeah, exactly. Probably doesn't work.
Who's the gentleman of hip hop, right? It's like that would be a disaster, you know.
Yeah.
So I think like the reason guys like us go into comics, I think as well, is that we're slightly off kilter. We're not really like the mainstream guys, you know. So like you were never going to be Taylor Swift, you know what I mean? Like you were going to do your own thing, and it's the same with being a novelist or something like that. Instead of going off and writing a respected novel, I always liked the piracy of comic books, the fact that it was kind of naughty, you know, a little bit naughty. And I think I worry about that a little because over the last maybe 10 years or something, like I think comics have got a little safer, haven't they? Generally, you know, that people sort of try not to upset anyone and all this kind of thing. You know? But I think to me the perfect comic pro is Frank Miller, you know, because he would always go against the grain. Whatever everybody was into, Frank would be like, well, let's look at that from a completely different angle. He'd go 180, you know. But that's what Marvel was like. People forget when Marvel appeared in the early 60s, it was so unlike the DC comics at that time.
Right.
So radical, you know. So I think comics has got to keep its radical edge too. I'd love to see more guys in their 20s that shot me, you know, who come in. You know?
Yeah, most definitely. I would as well. I mean, again, introducing that new perspective and trying things new is what it's about. I know, and I love it. I nerd out and geek out about it from both the creative perspective and the business perspective. I've seen a lot of guys, and I congratulate them all the time and see some of the things that they do into like. It's maybe not our approach, but it works for them. Yeah. And I don't look at it like it's a threat. I made sure, man, definitely when I was coming up in music, man, I'm not one of those guys that feels like, oh, that should be me. That's not my approach. The way that I see it is, okay, what did you do to make that work?
Yeah.
How can I maybe, if it even makes sense, and maybe it doesn't, implement that in what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And I'm always, I see some of these guys, definitely in comics, considering the state that it's in, for example, our good friends, they're also based out of Texas in Iconic Comics. And they have, even despite being an American company, have massive influence for them being independent in the East, right? Their stuff is in these general stores, and you see in Common America and all that. And I'm like, wow, that is really, really cool, because almost nobody has been able to do that. That with a new property, at least, right? Maybe some of the things that have been existing, but not with a new property. That is amazing that, you know, another country is starting to lean towards you, and they're not even English speaking, right? Like that's very, very cool to me to see that, and I gain a lot of inspiration from that. But the way that they do things are unorthodox, right? And you kind of have to be if you're going to get in that position. You're going to take your risk the same way that I did. I know this isn't going to be for everybody, right? And now I know it definitely as our stories start to branch. Blood Ruth is a prime example. That was our first horror comic, right? Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Like we started with this superhero thing, and I don't know, and it ended up being one of our most successful books, and it works that way sometimes. And that's another thing that I learned about music is that they always tell you don't get married to a song, and what they mean by that is like you can do a song and it may not even make the album, and you don't want to be that guy. But it also goes the other way, in which maybe it does make the album, and maybe you thought that song was going to be a hit to your own audience, and it comes to find out that song that, I don't want to say it was a throw-in, but you threw that song in there and you were like, it's a little against the grain from what we've been doing, and it ends up becoming this thing that everybody loves. We have a song, it's called Be Great. It's one of our more, even though Backwards, my band, has a more metalcore influence, we do mix more of the hardcore, which comes from more of the punk rock side of things. And that song was probably our most hardcore song at the time. And it was like, I don't know about this. And I threw a rap in the middle of it, which we hadn't really done either. Ends up being one of our most successful tracks. Same thing goes for comics. Guys are trying new things. I welcome it. And not everybody's going to say that that's going to work, but you never know. So why not give it a shot? Why not give it a shot is what I say.
And see your overview of the fact that you've looked at it going back 100 years almost, you know? Like, what's the trend you've noticed? Like, what made you think this was the way to go? Because you mentioned at the very beginning you felt the industry had been the same way for a long time, you know? So what was the gap in the market you spotted, do you think?
For me, the biggest part was how people was consuming how they were consuming media. It was changing rapidly. And I'm not talking about like people consuming digital comics. I'm just saying how they get information fundamentally changed. I'm going to say something that maybe some people that are watching this aren't going to feel me on, but trust me, discovery, as an example, is not the same way that it was even like 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30, 40. You remember like the whole newsstand approach. People were discovering comics. Was discovering comics, not just maybe in the back of a book where, they put like, hey, watch this. This is also coming out. But you go to the comic shop and you're browsing, right? And you're like, oh, what is this new thing? It's cover caught your attention. This is how a lot of people, especially older now, that's how they found out about a lot of things. So how they were discovering comics, that was the approach, the newsstand. Now, people have these things that are basically mini computers in their hands. And it's not to say that there isn't a discovery aspect that's still tied to going into the shop. It's that most of them already know what's coming out because they're being bombarded with this information, again, on the mini computer in their hand. So my approach, I use that to my advantage, for example, with comic books, as far as starting the company. I was like, okay, well, I can maybe do a more direct to consumer approach because discoveries change. So maybe I don't have to go through, no disrespect, and we know what's going on with Diamond and the distribution element, but I didn't have to go through that. I was like, why don't I do it myself and use like some of the following that I already have and the know-how, the savviness that in navigating like the internet in general. Maybe I can use that to my advantage for the discovery. And obviously it worked out, right? And we still sell to shops, right? Yeah. We have a retailer portal on our website, right? We still sell to shops. It's just that now we as a core part of our model, how people consume media, because that changed. I believed that everybody's marketing approach should have changed. Well, I won't say everybody. I would say that especially newbies need to take that into consideration. And how that looks for you, maybe you can make that unique to yourself. But I recognize that needed to be a core part of how we're producing our comics, right? So that was a big thing just from the economic side. But also we know Marvel and DC, as an example, they dominate the market, right? In the West, especially in America, right? Now it's starting to kind of change in that the East and how manga has grown so much. But generally speaking, even to this day, they dominate the market, right? And so what I'm looking at is what they're doing and what's good. What I think is they could do a little better. People know that I haven't shied away from my opinion on that, putting that out on the internet. But that was also what influenced me to build the company. It was a general frustration with, okay, why does continuity, as an example, seem like something that's just put on the back burner? Not to say that it is. I'm not in the writer's room for either of those companies, but it just felt like, well, it's a free-for-all. Everybody's just producing content just to make sure that it's out there. And maybe even some guys are creating, and I've seen other veterans talk about this, and where it feels like people are writing scripts specifically to become movies, right? So it's not about, okay, is this how this character would act? Is this like, or the events that happened in the last book, is that carrying over? The continuity is something that, from my perspective as just general customer, I geek out about that stuff, and I'm a big fan of it, right? The connected, shared universe is what I led with the comic. Like, it's what also influenced me. Seeing what Marvel and DC, they had their connected universes, but also what influenced me to create the company was looking at how that often felt neglected. And it's easier for me to say that, right? Starting a company versus a company that's been around for 50 years, right? Yeah. So I totally understand that. But I also, again, that's using that to my advantage. Sure, when Batman was created or Superman 30s or whatever, I don't think any of those guys are creating that with the idea that, this is going to now become a cultural phenomenon and it's going to be part of the fabric of American culture. I don't think anybody creates that with that in mind, but it did, right? So I created it with the company with it in mind that, sure, it would be a blessing if we're around for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and I'm still around by that, Lord willing. That said, at least I can say that we took care of business from the continuity perspective, and our fans know that each writer that we bring in is at least taking that into consideration. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to be perfect. We may slip up. We may make a mistake, but one of the core, we have our public code of ethics. It's on our website to this day. We put that in each book that we release. is our attention to detail with regards to what's canon, right? And that was also a big influence, obviously, to me creating the company, and it will remain a core part of us going forward.
I think until the 90s, Marvel in particular, they handled continuity really well, especially the first 10, 15 years, because there was such a small number of titles as well.
Right.
Not only a smaller number of issues of those titles, but you just needed to know who's the new guy who's Iron Man right now, or is somebody else in the Cap costume. Whereas now they've got so many titles per character, I think they've given up, and DC threw the multiverse into it and everything, and it's just like, okay, we're not getting paid enough money, to read all these books, so
right.
That's what a new company has an amazing advantage, and it feels a bit like Marvel in the early 60s, doesn't it? Because anything goes, like you only need to have read 15 books to understand the story.
Right. Right. And also, like, I talk about our universe Bible all the time, and this is something that I lean on heavily. So much so that I hired like the Saskas to specifically, we call them lore masters. And what they do is, with the different books that are going on, they extract, all the information that's truly needed. And they put that in a universe Bible entry, whether it be the development over the character, who the character is, alias, all that. So if I bring on a new writer, all I have to do is, okay, we take the universe Bible entry, bam, you know everything that you need to know about this character, how they look, and everything, even stuff that we haven't even like put in the actual comic book that has been published. You know everything there is to know. And we have that advantage in being a new company. And again, that was an advantage that I wanted to make sure that we're taking into consideration for years to come, because you only get really one shot at starting a new company. Sure, you can reboot your universe, but we've seen that may not always be what the fans want, right? At all. So I wanted to make sure that we're taking that into consideration from the get-go, from the jump. I did not want to try to scramble 10 years from now, like, oh, we got to try to get this together. It's too late by then. You put out too many books, everything's no. Let's take it into consideration from the get-go, and then have everybody be able to contribute to the development of each character. But everybody knows what's happening in everybody's books, right? Not just me from the companies. Yeah, I lead the company, but the Saskas know what Chuck's writing. Chuck knows what Mike Barron's writing. Everybody knows what's happening in their stories, right? And then we're able to come up with, really operate as just a cohesive unit, as a team, as a tandem. And if you need that reminder, I need it. Even this early on, I need it. I always go to my universe Bible and like, what happened? What? Okay, that happened. Okay, make sure as I'm writing this new story that I'm taking that into consideration. And I think the fans love that stuff because they pick up on that passion, right? That shows that you care. It shows that you really you care about what you're putting out, and you're giving them something to be invested in, right? So, how I believe was it Roy Thomas that said this, where he's like, from the continuity perspective, if you, as the writer, do not care about what you're putting out from a continuity perspective, why should I? Right? And he's speaking about that from the fans' perspective. And I totally agree and understand that. So I wanted to make sure that this is something that we took serious from day one.
And in terms of where your business goes from here, like the direct-to-consumer model is the vast bulk, if not all of your model at the moment. Do you have a plan to expand that out, or are you reluctant to give away distribution, retail and all that, because you suddenly have a third of the profit coming in as well, don't you? So like in the slightly longer term, what are you thinking?
Yeah, there has to be a balance for sure, right? And that you have to have, you want to expand as much as you realistically can, but in order for us to continue the growth that we have, it's like that profit margin, it needs to remain the same. So what we've tried to do, and this is one of the things that I'm really focusing on now as the CEO of the company, is what does that balance look like? Okay, where can I make the general concession? Because if I expand over here, that also means that we're going to attract more readers, right? Which may end up, they go to our website and they're buying back catalog or whatever. But that exposure, right, is going to be so very important. It can't all just come from my network, right? So we have got creative. This is why the retail portal started to exist. This is why we've done more collaborative efforts than we had and when we first started. Because you don't want to I don't want to give away the distribution, and we're not going to do that. I don't feel like we ever have to. But in the same respects, there has to be some balance in. Okay, well, this is if you take advantage of this will equal 1,000 more customers or whatever. That's 1,000 people that just posting online or going to cons you would have never had access to.
Yeah,
trying to identify those is what I've been focusing on this past year, and what I'm focusing on really for the rest of the year. It's like, well, how do we do that with it also economically making sense, right? Because I still got an operation that I have to run.
Yeah.
And we found there's some things that are coming down the pipeline that we've taken advantage of that I do believe is that's the proper balance. It's not giving away too much, but it's still the expansion. So yes, to answer your question, absolutely. We are considering other things to continue to grow and to continue to expand, so people can just know about us and who we are. And I'd rather that come from someone that we vet as opposed to someone else, right? So, and again, it doesn't necessarily come directly from me, but we want more people to know that, look, the Rippaverse is about fun. It's a fun new universe that you can pick up on, and you're getting here at the ground level still. I know it seems like we've been around for a bit, but really we're only 2.5 years. Well, going into next couple of months, it'll be the year 3. Finally, so we'll start. So we're very much at the beginning stages.
I'm a big fan of the idea. I love disruption. I always think it's exciting. And for 40 years you had the newsstands dominant. For mid 30s to sort of late 70s. Then you had the retailer model. The comic specialist store. And it seemed to be struggling over the last 10 years, I think, really. Certainly the last 6 or 7, but I would say 10 since about 2015. And there's been certain things that sort of boosted it up, with incentives and things like that. But realistically, it's had a tough time. But it does feel to me like there is a transition to something. I remember always anticipating this because I thought there's a 40-year thing with one thing, 40 years with the next. And I expected and I thought it might be digital. But that, because of the collector's market, and that's such a big part of reading comics, right? The owner collections and everything. So digital didn't maybe take off in the same way. Plus, it was kind of botched as well. It didn't really sort of go so well, But the direct-to-consumer thing, I think, is really exciting, and it's especially exciting for creators because you can hang on to your cash. You're right. It all comes back to you instead of being split among a lot of different things. But that was a big question I had for you: is how do you expand? Because it seems to me that the pre-existing customer feels like the majority of customers for direct-to-consumer models. Whether it's somebody who loved your work at Marvel or DC, or somebody who loved your music or whatever, to grow it back out again, you do need to dip into the mainstream a little bit in some way, to get the new people who then come and do your direct-to-consumer thing. So that felt to me like stores, whether it's comic stores or bookstores, whatever, is still going to be part of the strategy going forward.
Yeah, it is. This is why we're always trying to. We have our retailer model, but we also have our employees that are really put this in the face of these other stores and everything, because they know we sell, right? They know if they put it on the shelf and we say, hey, our book is there or our merchandise is there, they won't have it for long, right? But if they don't know about it, they can't sell it. Yes. So it is, you have to be kind of aggressive in your pitch there, and this is why we brought people on to make sure that they're doing that, because as long as they know about it, they'll be willing to buy into it. And you do have to that's why it does take a balance, right? It's like, you have our direct to consumer model, which, that represents what the percentage is. It's hard to put on it, maybe a little over 90 as far as what our general sales are. But especially with regards to expansion, again, going back to what I said earlier, how they consume media has fundamentally changed. Gaming is another thing, right? Where we've looked into, where it's like, how can we turn that into a comic book sale, right? This is why I started Rippaverse Studios, the animations that we do, right? Which so many people didn't give us the time of day until they saw an animated version of Ice right? And they were like, oh, that's cool. What is this company all about, right? So they saw that going, okay, now they're buying our comic book. So it's you got to meet people where they're at. And I think that's a general rule of thumb in any business, right? It's you're trying to appeal to a customer, and it doesn't mean that you have to change fundamentally just how you do business, but you also have to be open to the fact to, okay, that type of customer, wherever it is, wherever they're at, you have to have the wiggle room and the ability and the know-how, savviness, to be able to meet them where they're at and make that thing appealing, right? So maybe they didn't come from the baked-in audience that was comic books, right? As an example, a lot of our guys are waiting. We have a in-universe band called Norfolka, and an in-universe metal band. I know that a lot of people's introduction to the Rippaverse, coming from the music side, are going to be introduced to them through that. That's me meeting them where they're at. Yeah. Your first love is music. It's not comics, it's music. Okay, so how do I make this appeal to you? I have an in-universe band, and hopefully that sends you down a or if you just want to, Norfolk, that's your title that you're going to keep up with, fine. But oftentimes, even if it's, 10% of those people that say, okay, well, this was cool. This may have been even my first comic book. Why don't I go buy Ice On? Why don't I go buy Yaira? Why don't I buy Bloodroot? It's all about meeting people where they're at. So your model has to also take that into consideration with regards to just a general book sale and the exposure of the book to the retailers. So that's why we have emphasized putting our stuff in bookstores and other places, because while it may not be discovery from the customer's perspective, from the people, the bookstore owner or the shop owner, that's their exposure to you, right? And you never know how many more fans that you pick up by just, hey, we exist, we're here, and they're like, oh, okay, this is interesting, I'll put it on the shelf, and then it sells out.
Marvel and DC approached you at all of you? Because I'd have imagined that when that makes $3.7 million, I'd imagine Marvel and DC.
Oh, I have stories.
Did you hear from them?
I'll say this much, Mark. I have turned down probably as much money as I've made.
Right.
And I mean that sincerely. Yes, when you do sell $3.7 million of anything, it doesn't matter what you sell. There are people that are going to approach you with almost offers that you feel like you can't refuse.
Yeah.
And some of those even we've revisited. Now, look, I will never sell off the assets of the Rippaverse in any capacity. But the networking aspect of it all, I love, right? Yeah. I love the fact that that's people's introduction to it. And people that even maybe I consider competitors have come up to us with collaborative efforts, which I'm more inclined to do than saying, here's the property, you go do something with it.
Yeah.
So we've been approached by a lot of people, but I've been able to steer that conversation. I think this will make a lot more sense in the coming year. But I've been able to steer that conversation. Okay, instead of us selling off something or letting you just have general control or, just giving me an offer I can't refuse that just has a monetary value on it, what do you think about collaborating? What do you think about maybe us putting our heads together and seeing if I can make what you have going, make sense for us as well. And
licensing, back in the 90s when Marvel and DC were struggling, they went to Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld and everything, so that's my last question for you. Where do you see the industry in 5 years? Because I think licensing is going to be a huge part of this. I don't think Marvel and DC will be in quite the form that they currently exist in.
I agree.
And guys like yourself, I think, are going to be a part of that,
I think that is where the industry is going. I think that, especially with the mainstream guys and the big dogs, getting back into the licensing business, I think is going to be the approach. I've seen also this work very well for the Japanese, and they do this all the time, where they'll, with their companies, they'll sub-licensing it to some other company, and they're doing all these cool collaborations as well with those properties, which is why you'll see Guile from Street Fighter on a cover with some other company, even though Street Fighter themselves weren't the ones that facilitated it, right? Or the owners, or Capcom, I think it is who owns them. But yeah, licensing, I think, is going to be the move. It's going to be a way for people to make money, especially while maintaining control of their properties. And also, again, just I don't know. And I'm not saying that the direct market setup is like going to be completely phased out. I just think that there's a lot of uncertainty with it right now. And rightfully so, especially what's going on with Diamond and everything there. Like that kind of threw a wrench in, especially a lot of independent creators, unfortunately. And there's a lot of stuff happening, coming into fruition with that. So there has to be a new approach. And it's not going to look like, and I encourage any comic book creator to be open to change, because it's not going to look like what it did 10, 20 years ago, right? It's just not. And for better or worse, right? It's just not. Yeah. So you have to have the ability to adapt to that. And I do think licensing, to your point, is going to be a way that a lot of people are able to make a lot of money off of their property, or allow it to make it so it's almost like income that you don't even have to think about, right? It's like, let them do whatever they're going to do. And you can still, in doing so, maintain a lot of control, right? You could say, don't do this and don't do that, right? You can still do that, but I do think those collaborative efforts are going to be ways that people make money. And it's not just with comics, right? It's like that comic book character appearing in another people's unit. You look at young people love Fortnite, right? You may be like, if you're one of those older guys and like, why would people playing this goofy game where people are building all this stuff and what's going on? A lot of people's introduction to a lot of these young people's characters, that's why so many people are like, how can I get a Fortnite skin? Yeah. Right. And even these bigger companies are like running these entire campaigns on, well, now you can buy a Batman skin, a Wonder Woman skin in this video game, right? That's clearly them trying to expand their own market and using the licensing structure where the Fortnite or Epic Games guys can say, okay, yeah, we'll put your character in the game. If it works for them, they're going to make a lot of money off of the microtransactions of people making that people are making for their games, but also the exposure for that new audience that maybe didn't come up on Batman, and maybe didn't. I know that sounds crazy to think about. Like, what do you mean you don't know about Batman? Yeah, man, these younger guys are coming up. It's a different era, and that may be their first introduction.
Read a Batman comic. My kids have read a Batman comic. So
it makes sense, right? So that I do think is going to be how people, especially newbies, are able to take advantage of the market, utilizing licensing and expanding as well.
But that's what I remember whenever digital first appeared. I remember thinking, this is worrisome, because I thought it was a big threat to the comic stores. And I realize actually we're in an amazing period right now, because we have bookstores selling comics, we have comics specialist stores selling comics, we have digital. Hopefully that gets sorted out at some point, and direct to consumer. So all of these things are actually all useful weapons.
They're viable.
They help each other, because you might get into comics with direct to consumer and then think, I want more of this stuff, and then you go to the comic store and pick up other stuff. So that's
how it works.
Is 5 years down the line. Listen, speaking of the kids, I need to go and get them from school. My wife isn't around today, so I need to go and pick up the children. But listen, I'm so delighted to finally talk to you. It's super interesting. I love what you're doing. Continued success,
Thank you. Much love, and I appreciate you having me, man. Again, it's still surreal for me. I want everybody to understand it. It's still surreal for me to be talking with the great Mark Millar, guys' books who were very integral to me coming up, especially, again, you jumped into that Flash run, which is kind of crazy.
You're 5 years old. This is you've got a beard. You've got a beard. I shouldn't have done your first books,
That's good. Again, brother, I appreciate you so much, man. And thank you so much for being very supportive.
See you again.
Yeah, most definitely. See you.